Lena Montgomery sat in her office, the soft hum of fluorescent lights the only sound in the otherwise silent room. The walls around her were lined with thick folders, classified reports, and evidence binders, each one a testament to her career. As director of the FBI, she had spent years building this empire, a fortress of justice and secrecy. Her sharp eyes scanned the latest security briefing, her mind clicking through the details with machine-like precision. Terrorist cells, cyber attacks, domestic threats every day, it was a new crisis to manage. But today, something felt different. The weight of it all was suffocating. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Her phone buzzed on the desk, an incoming call. She didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Her assistant, Rachel, always on top of things. The woman was more than just a secretary, she was Lena's lifeline, the one person who kept the gears of the FBI running smoothly when everything else seemed to crumble. Director Montgomery, came Rachel's voice through the line. We've got another leak. Lena closed her eyes, a sigh escaping her lips. Another one. It seemed like every time she made a step forward, something or someone was pulling her back. The Bureau had been compromised more times than she cared to count in the last few weeks, and the leaks were starting to feel personal. I'll handle it, Lena said, her tone sharp and controlled. Send me the files. She hung up and went back to reading. The security breach wasn't just a matter of national security, it was a matter of trust. Someone in her agency was betraying her. She could feel it in her gut, the way shadows in her office seemed to stretch just a little too long. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, she let it ring, ignoring the call as she continued her work. The clock ticked on, and soon it was late enough for Lena to know she had to leave if only to keep up appearances. The burden of power was that it didn't allow for moments of weakness. She stood, adjusting her blazer as she took one last look at the room. Her sanctuary, her battlefield. Then, she left. Outside, the streets of Washington, D.C. buzzed with the usual frenzy of cars and pedestrians. It was the kind of day where the city seemed to move faster than usual, everyone running in their own direction, lost in the blur of their own lives. Lena pushed through the crowd with practiced ease, her face a mask of calm. No one would ever suspect that she was the most powerful woman in the country. They only saw the facade, the polished exterior, the sharp suits, the perfect hair. Her daughter, Mia, was expecting her at home. Mia, with her bright eyes and easy laugh, was the only part of Lena's life that remained uncomplicated. The rest of it, her job, her constant battles against the shadows that threatened to swallow her world, was a different story. Lena was used to being alone in the war she fought every day. But Mia, her 8-year-old daughter, was the one person who kept her grounded. Who reminded her what it meant to be human. Lena stepped into the cafe, the warm air inside a contrast to the chill of the street. It was a small, quiet place that felt like an oasis in the middle of the city's chaos. She ordered her usual black coffee and took a seat by the window. The cafe was busy with the low hum of conversation, the clink of spoons against cups, and the hiss of the espresso machine. The perfect backdrop for a rare moment of solitude. She had just taken her first sip of coffee when the door opened, and 2 uniformed police officers walked in. They seemed out of place here, their presence louder than the hum of the cafe. They moved toward Lena, their eyes scanning the room before locking onto her. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice clipped. "We need to speak with you." Lena raised an eyebrow, unsure of what was happening. She had been a part of the law enforcement world long enough to know that this wasn't just a routine check. Something felt off. She set her cup down, her posture straightening as she instinctively reached for the badge hidden under her jacket. She wasn't just any civilian. She was Lena Montgomery, the director of the FBI. "Is there a problem?" she asked, keeping her voice calm but firm. "We've had reports of suspicious activity," the second officer said, his eyes narrowing. "You match the description of someone we're looking for." Lena's pulse quickened. She knew the game. The officers were baiting her, trying to provoke a reaction, to see if she would flinch. But she wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. "I think there's been some kind of mistake," Lena said, standing slowly. She was calm now, her voice even, but there was a steeliness to it that made the officers hesitate. They didn't know who they were dealing with. "We'll need to ask you a few questions," the first officer pressed, his hand hovering near his holster. Lena's heart began to race, but she kept her composure. The tension in the air was palpable now, like a storm about to break. She glanced around the cafe, noticing the curious glances from other patrons. This wasn't just about a routine check. This was about power. Someone either in the police force or elsewhere was trying to send her a message. "I think we've all had enough of this charade," Lena said, her voice dropping just a touch, her eyes narrowing. "If you'll excuse me, officers, I believe I'll be leaving now." The officers exchanged a look, and for a moment, Lena thought they might press further. But then, one of them stepped back, giving her an imperceptible nod. They knew who she was now. The tension was broken, but not without leaving its mark. Lena didn't wait for another word. She turned on her heel and walked out, her coat sweeping behind her like a dark shadow. Outside, the cold air hit her like a slap to the face, but it wasn't the weather that left her feeling chilled. It was the reminder of just how fragile her position was. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not even for a moment. Not in the shadows where enemies lurked in every corner, ready to strike when she least expected it. As Lena walked toward her car, her mind raced. The officer's behavior, an overzealous check or something more? She didn't know, but it didn't matter. She'd find out soon enough. In her world, trust was a commodity that was in short supply, and every misstep, every moment of weakness, could cost her everything. She slid into the driver's seat, her fingers gripping the steering wheel as the engine roared to life. The city was sprawling out before her, endless and indifferent. In the shadows, she was both the hunter and the hunted. And tonight, she could feel the weight of the darkness closing in. The cool, crisp air of the early evening brushed against Lena's skin as she made her way out of the government building. The sharp click of her heels on the concrete echoed in the empty space around her, a reminder of the power she wielded, power she had fought so hard to claim. She had become accustomed to navigating the complexities of her role as the FBI director. Each day presented new challenges, but none had ever been as unsettling as the one unfolding now. She had been in the office late, working through a sensitive case, and decided to take a walk to clear her head. Her footsteps slowed as she approached the entrance, her mind still tangled in a web of classified information, high-profile investigations, and the weight of her responsibilities. She wasn't expecting anything unusual, nothing more than a brief moment of solitude to process the weight of the day. But as soon as she stepped outside, the situation shifted. Lena wasn't alone anymore. A squad car pulled up to the curb. The sudden screech of brakes echoed louder than the sound of her heartbeat. Two officers emerged, their uniforms stiff and unfamiliar. She instinctively straightened her back, adjusting her blazer, as a wave of unease washed over her. Something wasn't right. She tried to brush off the feeling, but it lingered, unsettling and persistent. "Ma'am, step aside," one of the officers said, his voice authoritative and flat, as if he had already decided the nature of the interaction before it even began. Lena froze. For a brief moment, she tried to process the command. There was no reason for her to step aside, no reason for any interaction at all. She had done nothing wrong. In fact, her mind was still on the reports in her office, important, confidential reports. The kind of work that kept her up at night, kept the country safe, and her position at the forefront of national security. "I'm not sure I understand," she replied, keeping her tone calm but firm. Her body remained poised, but her mind raced. Her eyes flickered toward the officer's gun, her heart rate rising, but she fought to keep her composure. Lena had navigated far worse situations before, but something about this felt different. The officer took a step closer. His hand hovered near his belt, as though ready to escalate. His partner, silent so far, observed the interaction from behind, arms crossed. "You're not listening," the officer snapped, his voice more insistent. "Step aside." Lena blinked, her mind struggling to make sense of it. This was a misunderstanding. It had to be. "I don't know why you're stopping me," she said, her voice still calm, but now tinged with confusion. "I'm the director of the FBI. I'm just leaving the office. I haven't done anything wrong." The words felt too familiar. She had said them countless times, though never in a situation like this, never with a uniformed officer looking at her as if she were guilty of something. The officer's eyes narrowed, his stance growing more aggressive. "That's what they all say," he muttered under his breath. Lena's chest tightened. "What are you accusing me of?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question, though soft, was laced with a deep frustration that started to seep through her veneer of composure. She was no stranger to encounters like this, and yet, each time it happened, the sting was just as sharp. The other officer shifted, stepping forward to join his partner. "We've received a report about a suspicious person in this area," he said, as though it explained everything. As though it made sense. Lena's patience, worn thin from years of pushing through systemic barriers and obstacles, was starting to crack. She forced herself to keep breathing, to remember the importance of staying calm. But the longer she stood there, the more she began to feel the weight of her identity pressing down on her, the way her blackness, her womanhood, seemed to overshadow her authority in their eyes. She wanted to laugh bitterly at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, the director of the FBI, a woman who had led high-level operations, who had outsmarted terrorists, dismantled organized crime, and dismantled political corruption, and yet, standing in front of these officers, she was nothing but a suspect. The reality settled heavily in her chest. She took a slow, controlled breath. "I've told you who I am," she said, this time her voice steadier. "I have identification in my bag. Please allow me to show you." The officer didn't move, his gaze unflinching, his posture locked in suspicion. "You think we're just gonna take your word for it? You can't fool us. You're not who you say you are." Lena blinked, disbelief creeping into her mind. The words felt wrong, but more than that, they felt familiar. She'd heard them before. Not just from these officers, but from a system, a society that refused to see her for who she truly was. Her frustration deepened, and this time, her voice cracked with the emotion she had been holding in. "I'm Lena Green, FBI Director. The head of this agency. I've dedicated my life to protecting the very people who the officer cut her off, his hand now hovering dangerously near his taser. We've had enough of the attitude. You're coming with us. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the shift in the air, the tension rising between them. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This wasn't about her or her actions in this moment. This was about something much larger. Something she had known her entire life, the way black women were seen and treated, no matter their position, no matter their accomplishments. The officer's hand moved toward his radio, but Lena's mind was already racing. She could feel the weight of every gaze on her, the potential consequences of any sudden movement. In her mind's eye, she could see the headlines, the social media posts, the public humiliation. This could spiral out of control so quickly. And if it did, what would happen to her, to the work she had built, to her reputation? Her heart tightened with the knowledge that no matter what she did here, she could never be just Lena Green to them. Not now. Not like this. I am not resisting, Lena said, her voice low but resolute. She met the officer's gaze, unwavering. But I will not be treated like this. The tension in the air was palpable. The officer's grip on his radio loosened, but he did not retreat. This isn't over, he warned, his tone sharp and final. Lena stood tall, refusing to back down, her mind now clear. She wasn't just fighting for her own dignity anymore. She was fighting for something bigger, the unspoken reality that so many had to live with every single day, the reality that had tried to erase her, time and time again. She wasn't going to let it happen now. I will not be intimidated, she said firmly, though her voice wavered only slightly. She understood the risks. But she also understood that this moment was about more than just her. It was a statement, whether they saw it or not. And for the first time, as she locked eyes with the officer before her, she felt the full weight of her role, not just as the director of the FBI, but as a black woman in a world that was determined to see her as something other than what she truly was. The silence stretched, heavy and thick, as Lena waited for them to make the next move. The officer hesitated, and for a moment, it seemed like he might back down. But then, he spoke. We'll see about that, he muttered. Lena took a deep breath, steadying herself, knowing that this moment was just another small piece of the larger battle ahead. Lena felt her chest constrict as the officer's grip tightened around her throat. The cold, metallic taste of fear lingered on her tongue. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she fought to remain upright, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her hands were bound, no hope for escape. She struggled against the weight pressing into her windpipe, her breaths shallow and desperate. The sirens in the distance were deafening, but to her, they might as well have been the echo of a dying world. Nothing made sense anymore. How had it escalated so quickly? One moment, she'd been standing in the middle of the protest, attempting to calm the crowd, her badge a silent reminder of her duty to maintain order. The next, she was on the ground, gasping for air, the noise of the protest drowned out by her own pulse in her ears. Stop resisting. The officer's voice was a low growl, filled with a venom that felt like it could burn through her skin. I'm not resisting. Lena choked out, her voice barely a whisper. It was futile. She could see the distorted shapes of the other officers around her, their faces cold and impassive, as if they were watching a spectacle unfold. Then, the world seemed to fade. A sudden flash of light hit her eyes, followed by another. Someone was filming. The camera's lens gleamed, capturing every moment, every desperate gasp. The pressure on her throat was unbearable. Her arms flailed, her nails scraping against the officer's gloved hands, but it only seemed to make him tighten his grip. Her vision blurred, her consciousness wavering like a dim light in the distance. She wondered if this was how it ended for her, suffocating under the weight of a system she'd once believed in. The suffocating grasp finally loosened, but only when her body went limp. She had been reduced to a lifeless doll, but even in that moment, rage flared inside her. She wasn't helpless. She wouldn't let them win. Not like this. Not in silence. The hours after the incident passed in a blur. Lena's phone buzzed incessantly, notifications flashing across her screen. She had no strength to deal with it. She couldn't stomach the images being shared, the headlines flashing across her feeds. Heroic officers save the day. Resisting arrest, a shocking display of violence. The unseen dangers of protest, an inside look. Lena sat in the darkened corner of her apartment, clutching her phone in a white-knuckled grip. The air was thick with the stench of irony, as if her own existence had become a twisted version of justice. Her colleagues, her comrades in the force, were hailed as heroes. The video made it look like she was the aggressor, fighting back with violence. The officer's words echoed in her mind, "Stop resisting." It was a lie. But what did it matter when the world had already made up its mind? Her stomach churned with a sense of betrayal, not just from the public, but from the system she had once sworn to protect. For years, Lena had devoted herself to law enforcement, convinced she was doing good. She had believed in the mission, in protecting and serving. But now, it felt like she was living in a nightmare where the line between right and wrong had been erased, and the rules only applied to some. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her younger brother, Eli. "Eli, Lena, please. I saw what happened. Are you okay? The news, it's insane. They're calling you a criminal, Lena. You have to tell me what's going on." She stared at the message for a long time. Her heart sank. Eli was the one person she still cared about, the one person who still saw her as the sister he admired. She had protected him for years, kept him away from the darker side of life, but now, she feared that her actions had put him in the line of fire. Lena wiped her face with a trembling hand, unsure whether the wetness was from the tears or the sweat of rage and fear. She didn't want to tell him the truth. Not yet. The truth was too big for words, and she didn't know how to explain it. How could she? When she was no longer sure of what she believed in. Her phone rang again this time, it was a call. Lena didn't have to check the number. She recognized the area code. It was her mother. Her mother's voice, trembling but steady, filled the line the moment Lena picked up. "Lena, baby, I saw the news. Are you hurt? Why didn't you call me? Please, tell me what's going on." Lena opened her mouth but found no words. She closed her eyes, the weight of the situation crashing down on her. She could hear her mother's breath on the other end of the line, waiting for her to speak, to tell her everything would be okay. But Lena couldn't do that. Not now. Not with everything she had seen and felt in the last few hours. I don't know what happened," Lena whispered. Her mother sighed, long and deep. "I don't understand. You've always been so careful, Lena. You always do the right thing." Lena's chest constricted. She wanted to scream, to tell her mother that the right thing didn't exist anymore. It had been erased by a system that rewarded silence and submission. A system that was supposed to protect people but instead choked the life out of them literally and figuratively. "I'll figure it out," Lena said finally, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to do it alone, Lena. We're here for you," her mother insisted. But Lena knew her mother couldn't help her. Not this time. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Neither of them knew how to bridge the gap between what had been and what was now. When the call ended, Lena sat in the darkness, her thoughts swirling in a dangerous spiral. She had no answers. No way to make this right. All she could do now was wait. Wait for the fallout. Wait for the media to twist her every word, every action. Wait for the day she would have to look her brother in the eyes and explain the impossible. But as she sat there, alone with the weight of it all, she realized something: this wasn't just about her anymore. The camera had caught it all. The choking. The violence. And soon, the world would know her name. It was inevitable. They would know her as the face of something much larger than a single protest, a single incident. Lena wasn't sure whether she was ready to face that. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure: she could never go back to the way things were. The system she had trusted, the one she had worked to uphold, was broken. And now, it had broken her too. Lena sat in the dimly lit conference room. The hum of distant voices and the rustle of papers from the adjacent offices felt like a world away. Her fingers rested on the cool surface of the table, her knuckles white, as if holding onto some fragile thread that threatened to snap with the slightest misstep. The weight of the morning's interview still pressed against her chest, a constant, suffocating reminder of the fragile nature of the world she inhabited. She'd been prepared for scrutiny. Hadn't she lived through it already? Being underestimated. Being reduced to something less than what she was, by both colleagues and the public. But this was different. This wasn't just a questioning of her authority or her capabilities as the newly appointed FBI director. No, this was a breach, a fracture in the veneer she had so carefully constructed for years. "Did you know, Miss Reyes, that your father was under investigation by the Bureau for a decade?" The reporter's question had come without warning. A sharp, cutting jab, wrapped in a thin veil of curiosity. Lena had frozen, the color draining from her face. In a split second, the carefully crafted boundaries between her public and private selves had shattered. Her father. The man whose name was now synonymous with corruption, whose shadow had loomed over her entire career, had become the focus of the very press conference meant to secure her position. She had started, but the words choked in her throat, like stones lodged too deep for her to clear. She had never publicly acknowledged her father's ties to the criminal world. It was a secret buried beneath layers of denial, something she had spent a lifetime compartmentalizing. But now, the truth was slipping out of her grasp, like sand through her fingers. Lena's phone buzzed, breaking her from the memory. It was a message from James, her chief of staff. "We need to talk. It's getting worse." She didn't need to ask what he meant. She had seen the headlines by now. The leaks had spread like wildfire. Lena Reyes, daughter of notorious criminal Antonio Reyes, now the face of the FBI. The irony was suffocating. She was supposed to be the one cleaning up the mess. Instead, her name was being dragged through the mud, her entire career questioned by people who knew nothing of her struggle, her sacrifice. Lena's mind raced, but she forced herself to focus. The reality of the situation was that she was no longer just Lena Reyes, FBI director. She was a symbol of both authority and vulnerability, the perfect storm for public opinion to chew up and spit out. The day was full of meetings that bled into one another: press conferences, briefings with senior staff, calls from lawmakers. James had warned her the media would be relentless, but she had no idea the depth of their hunger for a story. The questions came faster than she could answer them, each one more invasive than the last. Everyone seemed to think they had the right to know everything: her father's crimes, her relationship with him, the inner workings of the FBI, and how they all tied back to her. In the middle of a particularly heated briefing with a group of senators, Lena had to pause for a moment to gather herself. She'd been accused of favoritism, of using her position to shield her father's criminal empire. The weight of the words, the implications, were impossible to ignore. "I'm not him," Lena had snapped, her voice sharp with the intensity of a truth she hadn't been forced to declare so boldly in years. "I've spent my life working to be the antithesis of what he represents. The Bureau will not be a tool of corruption under my watch." The room had fallen silent at that declaration, her words hanging in the air like a dare. But even as she said them, she knew that it wasn't enough. Her reputation wasn't something that could be fixed with a few righteous statements. The public wouldn't see her as the reformer she wanted to be. They would see the daughter of a criminal. The question now was how long she could keep her personal life from overshadowing her professional one. By the time Lena returned to her office, the weight of the day pressed on her shoulders with the force of 100 anvils. She sank into her chair, her fingers brushing the edge of her desk, staring blankly at the reports piled in front of her. She wanted to pick them up, focus on the work, do something that might restore some sense of control. But the truth was, the work felt like a distant memory now. Every paper, every file, felt like a reminder that her life had been irrevocably altered. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from James. "The police officers involved in the incident are under investigation. The public is furious, and the department is getting hit hard. We need to figure out how to mitigate the damage." Lena closed her eyes, running a hand over her face. The officers were just a small part of a much larger problem now. They had made a mistake, but the public outrage wasn't just about them. It was about everything that led to this moment: the perception of corruption, the flaws in the system, and her place within it all. The police officers' lives were upended, their careers now dangling by a thread. She understood that the media had latched onto them as a symbol of everything wrong with law enforcement. But she also knew that this had always been the underlying issue: the system was broken, and it was up to her to fix it. The problem, of course, was that every time she tried to take a step forward, her own past, her father's legacy pulled her back, weighing her down. Lena's phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message. It was a call. A call she knew she had to take. "Director Reyes," the voice on the other end was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. "We have some additional information. There's a possibility that the leak regarding your father's ties to organized crime came from within the Bureau itself." Lena's heart stuttered. Her eyes narrowed. The implications were clear. Someone inside the FBI had gone after her, perhaps to weaken her position, to tear her down. The thought of betrayal of people she had trusted, people who worked under her, made her blood run cold. But it also ignited something else. A sense of purpose she hadn't felt in days. It wasn't just her career at stake anymore. It wasn't just her reputation or the impossible balancing act of personal and professional lives. This was bigger than that. This was about the integrity of the Bureau itself, about rooting out corruption from within. "Find out who," Lena said, her voice a little steadier now. "And when you do, let me know." She hung up, the weight of the decision settling heavily on her chest. Lena knew she was no longer simply an agent of justice, she was a symbol of it. And symbols, like everything else, could be torn apart, or they could inspire change. The real battle was just beginning. The weight of the world seemed to press down on Lena as she sat in the dimly lit office of her Washington, D.C. headquarters. The large windows, which usually offered a sweeping view of the city, were now covered by thick curtains. Even the sunlight felt like an intrusion. Lena had always prided herself on her ability to maintain composure under pressure, but after the incident, that had become nearly impossible. The calls for her resignation were louder with each passing hour. The media was relentless in their pursuit, painting her as everything from incompetent to a symbol of systemic failure. It wasn't just the press that was wearing her down. She could feel the stares of her colleagues as she passed through the halls, each one a silent judgment. Her position as director of the FBI had always been one of power, of unwavering control, but now, it felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter at any moment. Despite the criticism, there was support, albeit a quieter kind. The few who knew her well had reached out, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Some even shared their own experiences with racial injustice, telling her that they, too, understood what it felt like to be caught between the weight of responsibility and the burden of a system that seemed to be working against them. Her mind kept returning to that night, the terror, the violence, the moment when everything changed. Lena had done everything by the book. She had been calm, rational, and authoritative when she arrived at the scene. But even her best efforts hadn't been enough. The outcome was the same, regardless of her actions. "You did what you could, Lena." The words came from Marissa, her longtime friend and advisor, who had been the one to insist Lena come to her apartment for some rest. Lena had barely been able to sleep, and when she did, the nightmares had been relentless. "I'm not so sure," Lena muttered, rubbing her temples. "I had all the power in that situation. I could have done more." Marissa looked at her, her dark eyes filled with compassion but also an edge of frustration. "You know that's not true. You were out there trying to de-escalate a situation that was already boiling over. There's only so much control any one person has when the system is rigged." Lena exhaled sharply, her nails digging into the arm of the couch. "It's not about the system, Marissa. It's about me. I was the one in charge. And I couldn't protect them." Marissa's voice softened. "And now, you need to protect yourself. If you don't take care of you, Lena, how can you take care of anything else? You're going to need to rebuild your trust in yourself, your credibility with your team, and that's going to take time." Lena sat back, the weight of her responsibilities pressing on her chest. She had always been the one others leaned on, the one who had answers and solutions. But now, she was struggling just to hold it together. The public outrage, the pressure from politicians, the calls for accountability. How could she navigate all of this without losing herself? "I feel like everything I've worked for my entire career is crumbling. And for what? To protect people who will never understand the weight of what it's like to be black, to lead as a black woman in a system that wasn't built for me." Lena's voice cracked, a rare break in her usually composed exterior. Marissa remained silent for a long moment before speaking. "But that's why you're in the position you're in, Lena. Because you are who you are. You don't just lead the FBI because of your intellect or skills, you lead because of your integrity, your heart. And if you give that up now, the system wins. The ones who want to keep things the way they are, that's what they want. They want to break you." Lena closed her eyes, trying to process the weight of Marissa's words. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove herself in spaces where her presence was already seen as an anomaly. Her intelligence, her ambition, her resolve, none of it had ever been enough to escape the gaze of suspicion that followed her wherever she went. But now, it seemed like the hardest battle was not the one on the outside, it was the war within. Do you think it's possible to rebuild something when it feels like the foundation was cracked from the start? Lena asked quietly, the question more to herself than to Marissa. Absolutely, Marissa replied without hesitation. But it has to start with forgiveness of yourself first. Then, you move outward. People are going to talk, they're going to judge, but you can't let them decide who you are. You have to do that for yourself. Lena nodded slowly, though the path ahead seemed murky. She had fought for justice her entire life, had made sacrifices, and had risked everything to get to where she was. But now, the very justice she had fought for felt out of reach. And as much as she wanted to run from the backlash, to disappear and find some peace, she knew that wasn't an option. Not anymore. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence. Lena picked it up, her heart sinking when she saw the name on the screen. It was Jack Harmon, the deputy director. Lena, Jack's voice crackled through the receiver. There's another wave of protests scheduled for tomorrow. The press